Hey guys, today we are going to talk about sanding an armature shaft to fit one of these micro ball bearings. So this is pretty common. I haven't been able to find a ball bearing or have one made that does it all and fits all different armature shafts. So that's why we recommend that you sand the armature shaft. I like to use the Dremel tool. So today, kind of a little bit different video. We got Sam behind the camera. And I like to start with the calm side in the Dremel, and you want to make sure that it's not flying around. You can use a drill for this, but for this video, we're going to be using some 200 grit. And something that you want to make sure that you do is, or that you don't do, is you do not want to be sanding the pinion end of the shaft too much. So I make it to where I just sand this enough so that the bearing barely will slide over that, and then up in here is where you want the bearing to fit loose. I do not like bearings to fit tight. The car will be slower, it will bind it up, and the flex of the car, it will flex with the bearing in the chassis, and sometimes that acts like a brake on your armature. So I like the bearings to be loose down here. There might be others out there that, counsel against that, but I can tell you that in my experience, having the bearings be loose on the shaft is the best way to run them, except for on the end right here where the pinion gear goes. So when I start sanding this thing, I am going to be focusing everything on the area where the bearing rides and also where any of your spacers would ride. So I would say probably like an 1/8 inch wide path. You could fold this, make a little band. There's all kinds of ways you could do it. Something else that you do not want to do is you do not want the sandpaper to touch your armature windings, or you'll most likely be ordering another armature from us. So don't do that. Practice this on an old armature, but we're gonna go ahead and I'm just kind of working it back and forth here. Okay. This is pretty heavy grit stuff. You'll see, we'll shut this off. You'll see on the sandpaper here, there's little kind of black marks. That's pretty much where it's basically burning through the grit, and you'll just want to change that around a little bit. Something else that I like to do too, as you sand this, you're gonna be, making little medical particles. You can use some putty to remove those, and you can see on this shaft how it will clearly show you where we have sanded it. So now we will try our bearing. And like I said, we haven't touched this area, so I'm gonna press pretty good. And if this is too tight, you definitely don't want to get it stuck on there, so you might have to polish and buff that. But once we get it down in here, now you can see, it's kind of tricky to show you, but it does move around, but I can definitely feel that it's not sliding around as freely as I want it to. You really want this thing to be super free on there. So we're gonna pull it off. We're gonna do some more sanding here. Like I said, I'm gonna keep focus on that end. Typically, if you were doing a bushing setup, you would not have to do this. If you did have to do this on a bushing, this is just kind of a tech tip. You definitely would want to polish that surface as shiny as possible. It's going to be the least amount of friction. Since we're using a ball bearing, the inner race is what's going to be in contact with this, and we kind of don't want the armature to spin inside of that inner race. So that's why it's not as critical. But if we were going to polish that, this is some 1200. And we're gonna go ahead and polish that area. And on this one, this piece is folded over, and I will also kind of start backing it up against the spacer there to just give that spacer a nice polished face. If you're using an armature that's been epoxy, sometimes I've seen epoxy get on there, typically not on the Viper armatures, but I have seen that on other armatures out there. So we'll go ahead and clean the shavings off of there, and we will refit our bearing. Another tip, whatever direction or face you want up against the bushing, I recommend sticking consistent or sticking true to using that face every time, so that if you flip it around, it could fit differently. And I believe that that's probably where the source of the inconsistencies come from. On the bearings, the inner race has a little chamfer, and I believe that that inner chamfer is where the burr happens that causes you a little bit of problems there. So now our bearing is nice and free. You can see how easy that moves around. It's got a little bit of side to side play, which means that we've removed enough material from there. And you know, if you're still worried about it, you could go a little bit more, but it's definitely up here. I polished the entire shaft that time, so this slides off very, very nice, very close to net, and that will complete that side. So I do that side first, because once I start sanding this short side, I don't want to grab it back in the Dremel in case I've sanded a taper on that or something like that. Whereas holding on this end to do the in-bell side is just more preferred. And the in-bell side, in my opinion, is a lot more critical, because if it is too loose, then you can have the armature move around inside of your in-bell, and that will cause problems with your brushes. So I'm a little bit more cautious on this side, but it's also a lot shorter of a shaft. There's not a pinion there. And we'll go ahead and sand this side. Like I said, I'll do the entire thing on here. You want to make sure that you remove your washers that are going to be on your armature. Okay, and in this one, I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but you can see all of the little metal filings that have come off of there. Some of that is metal from the armature shaft. Some of that is the aluminum oxide off of the sandpaper, which I'm not really sure how that's sticking to that, but I know that we're not removing that much from this. So we'll go ahead and fit this bearing. Now, if we were building a car right now, you would want to use the bearing that's going in your in-bell, or use your in-bell on this side, and then keep the bearing. I always keep them separated. So I treat it as two totally different things, but you can see this slides on there very, very nice now. So we will go ahead and do a quick little polish. Like I said, you don't have to polish it with the bearing, but I like to do that just so that it's nice and clean. And we will go ahead, put the bushing back on there. If anybody has a good enough eye to spot that this wire has, or this armature has thrown a wire, then you're right. So this one didn't make it into production, but that's pretty much it. This thing is now ready to go. That's going to apply to really any ball bearings, any armature, whether it's a Tyco or a, whether it's Tyco timed, which is going to be for your Fusion, your Ghost Cat, Tyco, Mega G, any of those, or if it's an N-Bell time, Viper, G+, and I think there's also the Fusion out there too that has that, but the process is the same. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. You're literally sanding a shaft and making a bearing fit, but that's all that we do. I like this little Dremel. You can definitely use a drill. If it's wobbling, if you're holding the sandpaper on there, your hand's gonna follow it. So it's not like if it's wobbling, you're gonna be grinding your armature shaft wrong. I don't think that that's gonna happen. So don't worry about that. Get in there and try it on a junk armature, then run it on your, whatever you're trying to fit the bearings to. Make sure that you keep everything as clean as possible with some putty or clay. You don't want to have those shavings get into your ball bearing. And that's about it. If you guys have any comments, or if you have different methods to do this with, shoot them in the comments below. We'd love to see it, and we'd love to share that knowledge with our customer base. So hopefully you guys enjoy. See ya.